Hi, welcome to episode 6 of the 5% podcast, where I, Bryan Mansell from Gazeal, have a chat, warts and all chat with our brilliant estate agency groups that work with Gazeal and have done for the time that we've been bringing in reservations to the market, trying to improve the process for people who are buying and selling. I'm delighted to be joined by, I always call him one of our founders, Alex Knight from Knight Edmonds, who joins me today on this episode. And Alex is going to talk very briefly about his experiences with Gazeal and as an agency. Alex, thanks so much for your time and joining us. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here. So I'm quite passionate about the reservation agreement, so I'm always up for a chat and just talk about it.
Well, good. Well, like I said to you offline, this is designed to encourage agency groups and agents that are around the country that are, as you well know, because you've been one of them, as I have, having to work for free, having to pick up the pieces of chains that fall apart and sales that collapse, and how upsetting that is for people. You're giving up your time to help people understand how this can work and how it's beneficial to everybody. So, do you want to sort of kick us off with how this all came about with Gazeal, what how it all started and what you were doing it for?
So we've been with Gazeal since we launched the company, and I think actually our two companies launched at the same time,
Pretty much, yeah.
more or less. But when we launched it, we was looking at like what can we do that's actually different to other agents? How can we improve, the very generic, and that most estate agents, let's be honest, do the same things. Unique selling points are professional photography. It's not unique. Unique selling point will put you in the shop window. It's not unique. There's very little that is actually unique about what any agent does. You can argue, yes, we do it better, absolutely, but it's not unique. So I wanted to look at the process, look at everything that we did and think, right, how can we better this and bring unique, components to this process that will really improve it? And I then called up, I had the idea of, could we try and better the process, the conveyancing process? Can we actually give people a bit more security? And I started looking up online and saw a mention of a reservation, and then I saw a post from you about doing reservations. And I'll be honest, at the time I said to you, oh, can we have a copy of your reservation agreement so we can have a look at it? And I don't think I've ever told you this, but the idea when I asked for it was maybe we can just plagiarise it and do it ourselves. And obviously you sent it through with an NDA. And to be honest, I looked at it and I looked with Sam, I was like, there's no way that actually we could implement this ourselves. It's not something we can do. So, the idea behind it was that we wanted, something that could really improve that customer's journey and be a unique selling point for us as agents. And then having looked through and looked at the reservation process and how it all works, tried and tested it, I've become more and more bought into it. And, as you know, Brian, I've sat in on meetings with you, with the government's Department for Levelling Up, or whatever they call it now.
Yeah.
Where they're talking, infinitely talking about, mandating this process and never really doing. But that's how we got into it and how we, started.
Can I just ask you a question on that? Okay.
Yeah.
Something that you've said, and I know we've talked about this before, but there'll be many people watching this, or have heard other examples of this, or have done what you've done. And I know of a few names in my head, which I'm not going to share today, that got a copy of the agreement and then went and did it themselves. Why didn't you do it yourself? What stopped you doing it yourself?
Because of the beauty of doing it with Gazeal is that Gazeal are independent.
Yeah.
You've got a independent, unconnected third party to adjudicate.
Yeah.
What I really did not want to be getting involved in is I'm the one that's pursuing the buyer and I'm the enemy. Or I'm the one that's pursuing the seller and I'm the enemy. Pursuing my own seller to compensate the buyer. They're my client. That's a massive conflict of interest.
Yeah.
So I think having read it and looked at the fairness of the reservation agreement, the balance between the buyer and the seller, and it has to be balanced for it to be binding.
Yeah.
I think you need that third party you know, to distance yourself from the problems that may be created, or you know, the animosity between the parties. You know, we can honestly say to people in a sale falls through, okay, well look, Gazeal are completely independent. I'll talk to you and I'll help you through the process. You know, you're my client. I'm going to help you through that process. Talking to the seller particularly.
Yeah.
But Gazeal are independent. So the beauty of it is, it's not down to me whether you're at fault or not, because I'm always going to represent my seller. It's completely independent.
Yeah, that's something that when we first started this, we hadn't really considered the value of that. You know, there is a lot of skepticism in the market where a buyer is saying, the agent's asked me to do something and I've got to do it with the agent. And clearly there's bias. There always will be. And there you're not going to ever get a fair and balanced adjudication process if you need it. And what we realized now more than ever before is that the significant value is exactly what you've just said. It's based on the independence, the fact that our customers are the buyer and seller. And that's quite unique, that one party has both of those people's interests in common, which every other player in this show or in this game has one or the other, whereas we have both. And we'd underestimated at the beginning the value of that to the public.
I think the proof of that point, now you're probably, I can't remember, Brian, you might be able to tell me how many times we've actually had a payout on Gazeal. But I would imagine we're probably approaching double figures with the volume that we've done now, sort of 10 or 12 paid out reservation agreements. I've not had a single negative review.
Yeah.
Now, I guarantee you, if I was the one that was judged, jury and executioner on a reservation agreement, I would have, if it's 12 payouts, I would have 12 one-star reviews against my company, because I'm the enemy. But I'm not the enemy. Someone doesn't like the outcome. Well, look, Gazeal are independent from us. Look, you have to take it up with them.
Yeah.
And I can distance myself from it. I don't get any of the problems. It's
that
your
was very
problem.
important to us. Yeah, that's exactly right. That was very important to us. And this is some good advice for people, because it's something I learned at the time. We wrote down all of the reasons why it wouldn't work. Right? What are the most obvious challenges to this? Agent's reputation was on that list. The agent might want to do it because they'll think if someone pulls out, they're going to have a go at them, and that's why we really massively played on the independence part when we speak to the seller and the buyer as often as we can. Say, this is not the estate agent's agreement. It is not the estate agent asking you to do something. The estate agent is passing on information that their customer would like to give you.
Yeah.
And we still, to this day, when they were dealing with new agents, go to great lengths to point out to our agents is, this isn't your decision. What you are deciding as an agent is, do you think it's right that the buyer and the seller should be given the opportunity to offer commitment if they want to? That's it. It's as simple as that. Every other part of this is down to the seller would like to give the buyer this agreement, or the buyer, as we see quite often, would like to offer to the seller their commitment as part of the deal. And that's really key. So it keeps you out of the boxing ring.
Yeah, absolutely.
What challenges did you have getting to grips with it, getting it sort of rolled out to people, introducing it?
So I think that one of the biggest challenges we had when we was explaining it to people was it's not been done before. Yeah. So we were trying to convince people to come on board as guinea pigs.
Yeah.
Whereas now we've got so many case studies. Yeah. You know, there isn't really a scenario that we haven't experienced.
Yeah.
So I think that was a challenge when we first started out. But also it was a bit of a challenge, us just getting to grips with what the best way to pitch it to buyers, what the best way to pitch it to sellers was. It took a while for us to really optimise that. And I'll be honest, it takes ongoing management to keep that optimised, because things good habits very quickly, slip if you're not keeping tabs on them.
Sure. Yeah, growing pains, right? As you get bigger, as your business clearly has over the years, and more people come on board, or staff change, and so on and so on. Yeah. Sometimes you can find, and we all I'm sure every business that watches this will agree, sometimes that message can be eroded. That desire, that ambition is eroded ever so slightly, and it needs leadership to continually remind and refresh the workforce. What are our founding principles? Why are we doing this? What sets us apart? That's the thing. So generally, do you find introducing this to sellers? When's the best time for you? What have you found to when's the best time to introduce it?
I think that's an interesting question. When's the best time to be introducing it? Always is probably the answer.
Right.
And I think wind the clock forward. When we get to point of we've agreed a sale, are we going to have a reservation agreement? The ship sailed.
Right.
If you're asking that question, at that point, the ship has sailed.
Yeah.
I think when's the best time to be talking about it? Right. First of all, it's a unique selling point. And in whatever town you're in, it is probably unique. Because, certainly in my town, I look up and down the road, none of them do it. So I want to be talking about that when I'm booking the market appraisal, if it's relevant. When you're sounding out from people, trying to understand what's important to them, understanding their pain points, any opportunity that I can bring in a unique selling point from us about reservation agreements, I'll be talking about it when I'm booking it.
Yep.
Certainly talking about it when I'm out on the valuation itself.
Yep.
And if it's someone that hasn't had a negative experience previously, just explaining to them the statistics that 1 in 3 sales in the UK fall through.
Yep.
And we've got a solution.
Yep.
Because no other agent will be talking about that. They'll be talking about that they do lovely photos. Every agent will be talking about the lovely photos that they do.
Yep.
So I think it's really important, when we're at evaluation, to explain to people, actually, we can really reduce the amount of stress on their journey. They're not going to have to worry about it falling through. They're not going to have to worry that their buyer might go out and view another property. They've got a lot more security in the transaction, which actually reduces the stress significantly.
Have you found in your experience, and this is not a leading question because you don't know I'm going to ask it, because we don't rehearse these things, what impact, if any, has the service that you've included had on what you charge?
I mean, our fees, we don't negotiate on fees. We've got a very simple model. We charge a fee, and that is the fee. But we don't struggle with that.
Yeah.
I've never struggled on fees. We're not the cheapest in the town, and we do not negotiate. And we never, I say never, it's very rare that we will lose a listing based on fees.
Sure.
And I think the reason for that is because the value in what we offer is so clearly backed up in everything that we do. I mean, we've got it in our brochure. We've got, we believe in a better process.
Right.
We talk about the reservation agreement. We then talk about, we've got a case study here, and it was one of the first sales that we actually sold. The lady had 4 back-to-back sales fall through with 3 different estate agents.
Wow.
We got it on the market. It was one of the first properties that we listed. Quite an easy listing for us. We've got a reservation agreement. You've had four sales fall through. Okay, right, we can solve that problem for you. Job done.
Yeah.
We agreed a sale, got a bit more money, which was almost beside the point, and we put a reservation agreement in place. And 12 weeks later, that transaction completed, and there was our 5-star review, talking about the experience they'd had with 4 sales falling through. And they couldn't even just blame it on any one particular agent, because they'd had 3 different agents that had lost sales. We stepped in with something that's completely different, and we got the result.
Right.
And it backs up our fee. I mean, yes, buyers and sellers still pay for the reservation agreement. Fine. But we offer it, and we're the only ones that do.
Yeah, I've never seen, all the years you've been working with us, I've never seen once your sellers arguing about contributing to half a fee, right? So they don't have to do that, but that's the model that you chose, right, to roll out, that you believe, as the advisor to these people, that it's fair that they split it 50-50. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've had no comeback on that?
Not really. We get the occasional grumble, but usually when we get the grumbles or if we're getting objections, it's because somewhere down the path we've not followed the process that we've actually really refined properly.
Right.
I mean, in our MA packs, we obviously we have our brochure, but we also include the government's how to sell guide,
Okay. Yeah. Good.
which very few agents have read. But
Or
it's
heard
really
of. Yeah.
useful, or heard of, yeah. Heard of the How to Rent guide, but
Yeah.
there's a How to Sell guide. What is this sorcery? And I always say to people, it's the same pitch, every time when I'm talking about this. I'm like, look, the government published their guidance on how to sell a property back in
Yeah.
2019.
Yeah.
And right in the centre, they talk about when you're choosing a buyer, what's important. And you've got the obvious things. You've got how much they're offering. Are they in a chain? How they're financing it? All the usual things that you would expect.
Yeah.
The state the obvious advice. And then the government throw in a curveball. Whether the buyer is willing to enter into a reservation agreement to show they're committed to buying your property and prepared to pay you compensation if they pull out of the deal.
Yeah.
And I
Good.
read that word for word on every valuation that I go to.
Yeah.
So the government are advising people to do reservation agreements, and yet no other
Nobody
agents
else
are
is.
doing it.
Yeah.
So we talk about that. Then when we get our agency agreement, it's written in there. It's an opt-out clause.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're
Okay.
assuming everybody's going to want a reservation agreement. Look,
Yeah, why wouldn't
just to
they, right?
clarify, we spoke about the reservation agreement. I'm assuming you're going to want your buyer secured. You're not going to, want to let them pull out with no penalty.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Move on. Sign the reservation agreement. So we've spoken about it at point of booking the MA. We've spoken about it on the MA. We've spoken about it at point of sign up when we're signing our reservation agreement.
Yeah.
We then get to the viewings, and every viewer that we meet, as well as giving them a brochure, we're giving them our reservation agreement guide.
Okay.
And we're then telling the buyers, look, the great thing is, if you buy this property, you know that you've got security, you're not going to get gazumped.
Yeah. Which is what they want it off the market for, right?
Exactly. You can make an offer, and you know that if that seller pulls out, they're going to pay you compensation. So you can start spending money on a survey, you can start spending money on searches, you can spend whatever you need to spend with peace of mind and security.
Yeah.
And what's really important is that the sellers and the buyers all know about the reservation agreement, understand the reservation agreement, and want to do the reservation agreement before they even offer.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. So back to timing, right? They're always being talking about it.
It's all about the timing. We actually had an example this morning of how not to do it. And whenever we get objections to reservation agreements, I start to dig in and I start to say, well, did we have that conversation at that point, and that point? Now, the example that we've got is bearing in mind it's a bank holiday, we're on a Tuesday now.
Yeah.
Last Friday, they tied up a deal. The sales agreed. We've agreed the figure, 715,000, whatever it is. Okay, would you like to do a reservation agreement? I'm like, hang on, you're asking the seller, and the seller's like, well, I don't know if I really want to do it. I'm like, but this has come into the process far too late.
Yeah.
There wouldn't be an objection if we taken down the offer. And it's really important when you're taking down the offer to understand, because that's the point. The buyer wants something from you. They'll be singing their position. They'll be really trying to sell themselves to secure that property at the best possible price. And you say, okay, fantastic. Well, look, you've made an offer, 715. Just so that I'm aware, when I'm putting this forward to the seller, because I want to put you in the best possible light, are you going to be willing to back this up with the reservation agreement? Well, yeah, they're not going to say no at that point.
No.
Well, it's very unlikely that they'll say no, especially if they understand it, because it's been explained to them on the viewing.
Yeah.
Because they want something from you.
Yeah.
If you don't have that conversation when you're taking down the offer, and the seller says, yeah, I'll accept the offer, and maybe you have the conversation with the seller, I'll accept the offer subject to a reservation agreement, you're going back to the buyer, you're saying, you're giving them everything they want, and then you're asking them for something back. You're saying, look, the seller's prepared to accept your offer of 715,000 if you do a reservation agreement. Well, you now know that the figure is acceptable to the seller. The seller is going to accept your offer.
Yeah.
And if you just say, no, I'm not doing it, most buyers are savvy enough to realise, well, do you know what? Yeah, they'll forget about the reservation agreement because they've accepted my offer. the ship sailed.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you're absolutely right. Okay, this has always been designed to balance the sale, right? To make it fair. If you want my house off the market, I'm fine with that. If you come off the market as well, you can't say fairer than that. But if you've told me the house off the market, my offer's been accepted, and then say, "Would you like to pay £600?" I'll tell you no. Why on earth would I? First of all, I have absolutely no knowledge of what a reservation is, what the 600 quid's for, and so on and so on. So I'm going to say no instantly. And secondly, I have no idea what the benefit is. Now, if you're saying to me, well, actually, the reason for that is that the house isn't coming off the market and there's viewings booked on it next Saturday, well, my response might be significantly different. It will be different to if you say, would you like to, doesn't change anything. You can still keep looking and the house will be off the market for you. It's just bonkers, right? This is everything's wrong with this industry. You know, it's like you said,
it's a bit
about
like
introducing it right.
I suppose putting it into an analogy that sort of would really work for estate agents is if you're going out to a listing, someone said, yeah, you've not discussed fees yet. Someone said, yeah, I want you to come out and put my property on the market. You go out there and they say, all right, do you want to take the photos first? And you're like, I haven't done an agency agreement, but you end up taking the photos first or whatever it is. And you then get to the agency agreement. You're going to put your full fee on that bit of paper, aren't you? And you're not going to expect an objection.
Nope.
If you told the buyer their offer is acceptable,
Yep.
and then you ask for money off, or you ask, will they do a reservation agreement? They're just going to say no.
So when is the best time you've found in the last 6 years doing this daily? When's the best time? What advice would you have for other agents? When's the best time to introduce the buyer to this?
Best time to introduce the buyer is at the viewing.
Yep.
You need to be telling them, you need literally spelling out an instruction manual of how they can make themselves the best buyer. And from their point of view, they're hearing, how can I get this property for the best price?
Yep.
Well, make yourself the best buyer.
Yeah.
Commit to a reservation agreement. And then the really important, unmissable one is when you are taking down that offer. When the buyer is selling themselves, the most, when they're really trying to sell their position, that's when you give them the opportunity to put themselves head and shoulders above the average buyer.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you don't, all right, yeah, we've agreed the deal, we haven't even spoken to the buyer or seller about the reservation agreement, the deal was agreed, it was agreed last Friday, we're getting ready to do the sales memo, oh, yeah, do you want to do a reservation agreement?
Yeah.
They don't.
No.
They don't. I can guarantee you, and that's exactly the example that we had today in the office downstairs. That conversation didn't happen. And I said to my colleague, look, I think there's probably 1 in 1,000 chance now you will get a reservation agreement signed on that deal.
Yeah, I think
you put their arm behind their back, you can really try and force them. You can, even if you was conditional selling it, which we don't do, the seller might. Interestingly, the seller might say, I will only accept your offer if you do a reservation agreement, and they're allowed. Their house, they can sell it to anyone.
Yeah.
But in that example, they're not going to do it because they don't have to. They already know their offer's accepted. Why would they?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So let me finish up with this question. What advice would you give to agents watching this that have either been thinking about working with Gazeal and using reservations, or are trying to and just can't seem to get it off the ground?
I think what's really important is that it is completely embedded into what you do. You can't do it half-heartedly. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be. You have to really believe in what you're doing. You need to really believe in the process, really believe that in the benefits. A lot of it will actually come naturally to you if you properly believe in it.
Yeah.
But I think what's really important is that it is integral to what you do. And if you properly believe in it, it will be integral to what you do, because you'll want to talk about it on valuations. You'll want to talk about it when you're booking the valuations. You'll want to talk to buyers about it on the viewings, and you'll want to, when you get that call, oh, fantastic, I've seen a property, won the street, I viewed it on Saturday, I want to make an offer, I want to offer the full asking price. Yeah, I'm a first-time buyer, I've got my agreement in principle, I've got my deposit. Okay, fantastic. Sounds like you're in a really good position. What we can do, just to clarify, before I put this forward to the seller, just so I can make sure that you're in the best possible position, are you prepared to commit to this sale with a reservation agreement?
Yeah.
They're selling themselves. They're not going to say no.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the advice is, first of all, make sure you believe in it. If you don't believe in it and it's
Don't do
just
it,
a
yeah.
bolt-on sale, it's not going
Yeah.
to work for you. Just forget about it. Move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sell mortgages. You believe in the money at the end of that. But reservation agreements, you really have to believe in it. And I think if you believe in it and then you get it at the right milestones and you're constantly talking about it, it will just fall into place.
What do you think over the years, financially, this has done to the business? How have you benefited from it, do you think, financially?
Do you know, I've never sat down and calculated it. I can tell you it saved us an enormous amount of aggravation. Yes, don't get me wrong, it's a bit of a fiddle, chasing people to sign their reservation agreements, but I can tell you what, that is far less significant than having to go through sales progression 2 or 3 times in the same property.
Yeah.
I'd much rather do a little bit of work to get a reservation agreement signed. If I had to calculate what it's actually saved us, I mean, the reduction in our fall-through rate, we're into hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Just purely on the basis that our fall-through rate is that much lower. We don't need to sell as much to break even. We don't need to sell as much to make profit because we don't have as much fall-through.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because when people ask me that question, how much is it worth to me, they have to wait a long time to appreciate that because it doesn't happen today or tomorrow. But that time will come. So if you don't do it today and you wait a year will come along. And in that point, you will be worse off without it than you will be with it. Simple as. Exactly how much that is. And I'm not even talking about the benefits of being able to go out on an instruction and say, oh, by the way, you mentioned before that you'd had challenges with your sale. Because people don't say, oh, I really hated the photographs of my last house. They don't say that. They say the bloody thing took too long.
Sometimes they do.
It was a pain. Well, yeah, it was a pain in the arse. No one came back to me. My buyer pulled out, whatever. How much is it worth to you that doesn't happen again? And if you ask somebody, and I did this on a phone call in one of my early days of Gazeal. I remember I used to speak to a lot of your sellers. It was just me, as you remember back then. Mm-hmm. How much is it worth to you, your buyer not pulling out, or you being or having a major deterrent to pulling out? And they said that's worth 10 grand to me. Now I said, well, the good news is it's 500 quid, or it's 250 quid in this case because you were splitting it 50-50. Straight away, no brainer. They did not want the risk, the possible threat, of the sale going wrong, and even if it didn't, the worry that they would have because some people are more anxious than others. They had a cash value on not having that potential anxiety, of not keeping their fingers crossed. Because actually, what it comes down to in the UK, well, not in the UK, not Scotland, but in England and Wales, is would you rather have a firm handshake or your fingers crossed? When you go into a process that is going to take 3, 4, 5 months, when you're only going to know it's happened 2 weeks before it does. The entire time up to that point, you got your fingers crossed.
Interesting point you raised a minute ago, Brian. You said about how much money have reservation agreements saved me. Yes, it saved a lot of money on fall-through rates. How much has it made me, though? I'll tell you what, an interesting thing we do is one of these reservation agreement guides lands on every doorstep of every full sale that falls through in our patch with a letter poaching for business. And I haven't got the exact numbers in front of me, but I would say that the number of listings we've taken off other agents at that sale falling through point is into hundreds, with an average fee over 5,000. So that's £500,000 worth of fees that we've taken off other agents because we post them our reservation agreement guide every time their sale falls through.
So I'm about to show you a flyer that we did as an exercise a couple of years ago. The most successful flyer I've ever had in my 30 years as an estate agent. I did it with Gazeal because it works on the words. And we used a whole lot of different versions of flyers to test the responses so we could give better advice to our agents. The one I'm going to show you now had an overwhelming response, and it's understandable why when you read it. But the people that received this hard copy through their door were people that had had a fall through, we had a 71% click-through rate, people going onto the URL on the card and coming to Gazeal. Now, we tried a whole load of others, right? We had 4 different cards going out. This one was the only one that mentioned cash. Everything else said, have a reservation agreement to protect you. Have this to protect, don't have stress, don't have anxiety, don't worry about your sale collapsing. This was the only one that said, well, what you can read, 10 grand. And everybody rang us. Everybody contacted us. On the back, we even put a phone number on the back and a website, put a phone number, and we monitored it from that trackable number. So we knew that number was only on this card. We had 4 different numbers on the 4 different cards. So we knew when the phone calls came in, can you send me some information? I'm interested in this. My sales just collapsed. Can I get 10? Now, we had some people ring us and said, well, my sale has just collapsed. Can I have 10 grand? We're like, yeah, sure.
Be nice, wouldn't it?
It would be very nice, yeah. I mean, so maybe that's what the government should be doing, because they don't get 10 grand every time the sale collapses. Anyway, look, Alex, thanks so much. Good to speak to you. And thank you very much for sharing your time.
Thank you. Thanks, Bryan.